you reproduce a place of, that was this moment? Essentially, you could take everything that was going on right now, copy it, and produce it in another part of space. And so that could be useful for just producing what we think of as this same time. We go back to the same time because we produced something that is going on forward from that time, but it might lead to slight asymmetries, Berenstein or something. Do you think that they're messing with that stuff? Like,
I think if I think it's possible that somebody has figured out how to mess with that. It speaks to the multiple dimension, hypothesis that each time, rather than messing with the specific reality, what happens is another timeline is created, so that you have these countless timelines.
Yeah.
There have been times where I have wondered. I was in Iraq in 2003, and I was doing my job, and part of my job one night after midnight in the back streets of Mosul, me and the guys I was working with, we were riding around in a car doing some shit, and we had our guns hidden, and we were wearing jalabiyas and keffiyas. We were dressed like Saudis, and in an unarmored car, which and we got surrounded by a pickup truck pulls in front of us, blocks our way in an alley. We get surrounded by 9 guys with AK-47s ready to just right at us. We obviously, nothing bad happened. Here I am. Or did it? Sometimes I wondered, did they shoot us in that timeline? And did we or I jump to a new timeline at the moment I would have otherwise been killed? Because my life after that, there's been things that just seem slightly off, things about life and reality that just don't seem to work as I understood them, life and reality, before that moment. And here's the thing that makes me wonder that is, when that happened, I remember inside, everything just went to a peaceful calm. Everything slowed down. I mean, I vividly remember looking out the windows and seeing, I can see it now, these barrels of these AK-47s, like right there on the other side of the window. I'm looking, I can see the texture of the metal, and I can see the scare. These guys ended up being the Iraqi security force. They weren't bad guys, but it was, had we twitched the wrong way, then maybe we did. Maybe they blasted the hell out of the car, but did I jump to an alternate timeline in which I survived it? And am I the me from the other timeline now living in this timeline? In other words, maybe the weirdness that I'm experiencing is I'm supposed to be of another timeline, and now I'm ill-fitted to this one. These
weird as that sounds, it makes a lot more sense. I mean, so many people I know have gone through some near-death experience.
Mandela, right? Like, for those that experience the Mandela effect, could that be an aspect of it? And then it takes into like dreaming and the lucid dreaming aspects of it. Of, are you going into these different timelines and fractals and realms of it?
Yeah. Can you, in certain dreams, have the experience of seeing years ahead? Is the experience of having a dream like that actually another you has jumped back? So what you're seeing in your dream, you've done this in your sleep, but what you're seeing in your dream is kind of a preview of what's to come. I mean, is this an artifact of being able to jump through time into your own timeline using your consciousness? Now, what's interesting is we've seen this in fiction through the works of Jack Finney and Richard Matheson, specifically Jack Finney's Time and Again, I think. Richard Matheson is now called Somewhere in Time. And they both used a system of time travel that was anchored to the will, throwing your consciousness, therefore yourself, back in time. Okay, now they did that dramatically. What's interesting is they wrote this stuff around the time we are told scientific remote viewing was being toyed with and developed. And it's eerily eerily resonant with what we're told about remote viewing, what these characters in Finney and Matheson do. So did Finney and Matheson learn something true about time and our relation to it and the ability to travel through time? Did they learn it from military guys who were being, trained in remote viewing? Particularly when you read Finney's novel, the first one, Time and Again, it's described as an Army project. This was published in 1970. It's described as an Army project. There's all these time travelers who have these little apartment boxes, cubicles, and they would just use their mind to focus on their target time period. They would be surrounded by clothes and artifacts and stuff of that period. And through the will, they could throw themselves back in time. When you read the book, it sounds a lot like what we subsequently learned how remote viewers work. And so I wonder what Finney knew. I wonder what Matheson knew, because Richard Collier in Somewhere in Time totally does the same thing that, Finney describes. Of course, Matheson's book came out 5 years later, but they were contemporaries. They probably knew each other. Did Matheson know? An associate of mine, a guy named Seshari, he and I have some private letters between us in which we have fleshed this suspicion out about Matheson's Somewhere in Time. Sesh doesn't want me to publish this or talk about certain details of it publicly, so I can't. But it's a mental exercise. It's an analysis. But as far as the Mandela effect, I kind of lean towards I'm friends with Dr. Farrell, and he and I have had a lot of late night conversations, private conversations for years now, suspecting that maybe something to do with CERN, whatever is really going on with CERN, having something to do with what we're calling the Mandela effect. But I think there's either multiple timelines involved there, but somebody's doing something. All this to say, I would agree with you. I agree with the suspicion that somebody's doing something to mess with past events as we go through the timeline of the now.
Monkey trying to control it. Oh, Frank Zero, right?
Yeah.
Zero. What's up, Frank Zero? How you doing? Walter Bosley.
Hey, man.
Yeah. Hey, I think we've crossed paths before. Yeah.
I've interviewed you many times. Yeah.
That's what it is. Thank you. I'm sorry. It's just like it becomes a
face. The face is harder. Yeah.
No, Walter, it's okay, man. You do so
that's
much
right.
of this stuff. But
That's
we've
right.
done video interviews. We've done written interviews.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Frank, do you have any questions or thoughts on space and aliens and all the things and space-time continuum affecting?
Do you have any questions on the space aliens or space time? You kind of cut out. What was that?
Exactly. Something like that.
Okay.
Space-time continuum, aliens, hashtags abound.
Yeah, no questions, but I was listening earlier to the NIMSA stuff and the Project Paperclip stuff, and last couple of minutes I was not listening, but where are we?
So we're talking about the idea that maybe CERN or in general that space-time control is being committed by some groups, or perhaps might be. The idea that the Mandela effect or something is because of this, and also maybe that aliens, our idea of aliens might be UFO time travelers, something that's from the future, that we're interacting with something on the space-time level, or something that's aware to travel time like space. They're more
space time. If you're going from one star to another, time is an aspect of that you're going to be included in your warp drive or whatever technology bubble thing that you're using to go through it, right? Like whether it's a wormhole or field or something, time's going to be included into it. And on that part, Walter, what's your opinions on the Tic-Tacs, and is that like a time interdimensional? Is it alien? What do you think it is?
Nah, that's just advanced military technology that's being developed in secret that will be intended for the military, and there's nothing mysterious about it. It's just secret. It is advanced, and that whole narrative that it's something mysterious falls apart when you look closely at it. And so no, now I'm impressed with whatever it actually may be. But no, since the beginning, going back to 2017, that's when I did my first close look at it, and nothing that has emerged since has changed my mind. In fact, it's even more convince me that it's just some pretty cool technology that our side's developing. And I think that's what it is.
But also at the
Well-
same time of Werner von Braun, you've got like Arthur C. Clarke, and there's a big push again, similar to the 1800s, to have contact with something, right? Like,
Sure.
are they propagandizing that, or is there really like a lust for interacting with something new? You know, like
Who propagandizing what?
Well, you know, like Arthur C. Clarke comes to mind. Just the idea of saying that we should be making contact. We ought to be trying to. I mean, Reagan made a speech, right?
Sure, yeah, I think that's a natural human desire to look. That's what fueled, coming to the New World. The Europeans they wanted to, it was time to go find some new place to exploit the resources and such. And so it was the same sentiment. We got to go to the New World. We got to go to the New World. Oh, there's people over there. The people of the New World.
Atlantis. But Arthur C. Clarke's Sentinel, right before 2001, it's not a monolith. It looks a lot like a Nimza craft or a Sonora airship to me.
Well, on the cover of that book, the artistic depiction, and I think you could argue the description,
Chinese
right?
spy balloon almost.
But
it's in between Nimza and spy balloon for sure. But this is before the monolith. So before the monolith, we're looking at things that are a lot, again, more similar to the older depictions. So
and also remember, between Clarke's story and the film that Kubrick did, Kubrick veered way off of Clarke's story,
right. They made Arthur C. Clarke rewrite it. So 2001's written at the same time as the movie. So it seems like they both had somebody overhead telling them what they're supposed to be writing about, perhaps.
I would say that Kubrick. I'm in the camp that Kubrick was trying to tell us something, and no, it's not that we didn't really go to the moon and he faked it. I am.
He's got bigger things to talk about.
I'm not in that camp. I that's another thing I laugh at. But
he had to fake the moon landing on location, so it was expensive.
Yeah. Well, don't get me wrong.
When Kubrick changes
something,
might
have shot some scenes on the ground ahead of time and then use them if and when they encounter.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, but this isn't even about the moon. Like, what is it really about?
I think the big secret about the Apollo program is that technology that they used to get there, and especially to leave the moon, was just it was somewhat what we would call exotic. I think that's the big secret. But the stuff we saw was on the moon. We did go to the moon. We haven't been told, in my opinion, we haven't been told everything about the technology used to help get us there and back. And we have not been told everything they found there. That's what I think the big secrets to the moon landings are.
Walter, do you think that when they, there's so many little stories and you read so many different ways or sources that it could have come from, but do you think that they really were sort of intimidated by some craft on that crest above them as they were landing? Do you think that story has any validity?
Here's the thing. I don't think that story has validity, but I think there's a nugget of truth in the suspicion of something along those lines.
Sure.
I'm not the only one. There's been people before me that have been trying to point out that particularly our early space program seemed to be some type of palm leaf to something or someone out there. Again, I think Joseph Farrell's one of them, but he's not the only one who points out that this plaque, we came in peace, to the moon, was to try to convince somebody out there now that we really were coming in peace. But I think it's very possible that, something more is known about who's out there and what's out there, and maybe they were walking on eggshells. Maybe there was something to those stories, not specifically how it's told with the big craft. Right. But look, that's possible, because if there's another civilization able to do that, why not? Why couldn't they have had their ships watching, saying, "Hey, here we are"? I'm not discounting it entirely, but there could be something about the nature of the moon itself.
Yeah. They could have gotten there and just seen everything Richard Hoagland has tried to like put in 5 different colors to get
or a
us to
lot of
go
it. I'm not buying the glass dome thing, but I certainly have no problem with the idea that they found some type of ruin there
Yeah,
or relic.
majestic structures or something would have been enough to
Yeah.
mystify them, you know.
So I think, and then you hear the stories that the astronauts themselves,
Right. That's
I
the
think through legitimate sources, they really did say this, like the weird murkiness of their memory, the weird nausea that would overcome them when they tried to go veer too close to certain details.
That
They were
was my other
isolated
question
for like
for you.
30 days, right? They were isolated for 30 days when they got back, so they weren't able to have
Yeah,
contact with anybody.
That was my other inquiry. Like, if we
Yeah.
have all these different situations where the astronauts seem kind of off, and if
Yeah.
we throw away any information about it being faked and them just hiding that, why did they come back in that first conference? They were so soberingly like haunted.
Because
It was hard.
maybe what they saw. I mean, think about it. They were up there. They would have been the ones firsthand seeing things that hypothetically that we still don't know about, and maybe it was very sobering. Maybe what they, maybe the ruins they saw up there, that can be sobering. Now, I have not personally verified these kinds of stories that we hear. I've learned it from the same sources you guys probably have. I've never really done a deep dive on whether these stories of the nausea and all that are true. To the extent that I'm aware of it, I come away with the impression that, okay, this looks legitimate, but I at the very least, I'm okay with saying, yeah, I think they definitely saw something up there that we're not being told about, that's been kept secret.
Why do you think that Buzz Aldrin like told that little girl 3 years ago when she said, how was it? It must have been really exciting. What was it like to be the first man on the moon? And he went, well, the big secret is we never went. And then he
Yeah,
smiles very
she's like, why didn't
sweetly
we
to
ever
her.
go back? And then she said she asked
No,
why we
he
never go
goes,
back. He's
he
like,
goes, we never went.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of other quotes. I mean, still.
So we didn't. He said, well, we didn't go.
Are-
We didn't. That's the thing.
Are we looking for layers of mind control? Are we looking for layers of secrecy and the emotional reaction as such? Or
here's an interesting thing about that. Again, in my book Shimmering Light, I talk about remember, the Air Force was the most turned on of the military branches of MK Ultra. They went off and started their own independent MK Ultra program. This was under the U.S. Air Force Aerospace Medical Division, okay, which was directly involved with putting man in space. Now, we know MK Ultra was real. It's not fantasy. We know the Air Force started their own independent MK Ultra program. That's history. That's not fantasy, okay? We know that the Air Force was the ones who really started our manned space program. So why would we suddenly, if they had developed MK Ultra and we were using this to cover secrets, we know that the CIA came clean in 1973 that they had been messing with this all through the 60s. Why not NASA? So the evidence suggests, okay, that the Apollo astronauts, Apollo 11 specifically, and any of them that went up there, would have had this applied to them upon return. And that could explain the murkiness. That could explain the reluctance, the awkwardness. That could explain the morose
sort of question how they go in, how we would go into these weird different answers or thought processes.
Yeah.
And especially
just like a out of sight, out of mind, out of mind, out of sight hex on us all.
Yeah, or just even a false narrative laid. Remember that's what MK Ultra would do is to suppress the actual activity. What they were seeking was to be able to lay a false narrative in the psyche over that. It's called psychic driving or piling or something like that. And this is what they were fooling with, and this is what they were having some success being able to do to a degree. So, in my opinion, that's what they would have done hypothetically to the Apollo 11 astronauts, any astronauts that went to the moon. they come back and they're put through that, and a false narrative is laid as kind of a blocker to what they really saw, so they wouldn't talk about it.
Which might
And
have been
yet,
some really Solomonic magic stuff. You don't even know. Who knows what it was?
who knows what
Yeah.
they saw? Yeah, it honestly,
Didn't
in
have
all
to be nothing.
fairness,
Yeah.
it could have been anything along the spectrum that, you know, a lot of people suspect. But
I would just ask then if you're their handlers, or you know how these programs work, and you're above them as an authority figure of any kind, why would you go, we know they're going to be really kind of whacked out and like don't seem like their souls in their body for the next 30 minutes. Let's stick them on TV. You know,
Well,
we
again,
already got the
they
whole.
waited 30 days, 33 days
Yeah.
or something. They were
Did
kept in
not know
isolation.
that.
They were kept in
Yeah.
isolation for 33
Yeah,
days.
Yeah,
okay.
quarantine.
I did
They were-
hear that. Yeah.
they were in quarantine, and look what my dad went through. I was told, when I was on active duty in the Air Force, I was told by someone who up the chain from me, not in an official, this is how they do things, this is how they tell you some of the juiciest stuff. It's not in an official briefing, it's a side conversation, you know, in your off-duty hours. Okay, I was told what they did to my dad involved hypnosis, and they suppressed his actual memory of the real events that happened. And get this, they keyed the renewal of the hypnosis to the cycle, to the full moon. So
Right.
what the way they did it was every month when he would see the full moon, it would reactivate in his psyche and suppress. But here's the thing they couldn't control. It was kind of it looks like bipolarism, because the mind is struggling with this. And I was told that through the years and over the decades, it begins to break down a little bit, and it affects the person deeply, because they know that there's a truth in there, deep in there, but they can't quite reach it. They can't quite bring it to the surface, but they're more than willing to talk about what was likely the false narrative. And my dad would get really emotional. I mean, this was not fun for him. And so when you look at, in fact, I think there's one press conference, right, where all the Apollo 11 astronauts, I mean, they've been back for 30 days and they're still just kind of really, they're like really depressed or almost nervous. It's strange.
You know Project Capricorn? The film.
Tell me what it is.
The movie.
The film with O.J. Simpson.
Capricorn 1. Yeah, a high school buddy of mine.
I'm sorry.
A high school buddy of mine, his dad was a helicopter pilot in Hollywood, and he flew one of those choppers in the movie.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, I definitely saw that movie. And here's the thing, you know, a lot of the rumors about we faked the moon landing did not emerge until after that movie came out. Oh, and you want to know where the origin, at least the credited origin with the we faked the moon landing came from?
National Lampoon? Just kidding.
No, right here where I live in the San Bernardino Valley, the guy was, he was at the time, I believe, a University of Redlands student, but he lived right here in Redlands, which is a town I go get coffee in every morning.
Oh, yeah.
And so right here in the goofy old Inland Empire, Southern California, that we faked the moon landing. And I'm as I understand it, it might have been motivated by
to that idea. Yeah.
movie stores. Yeah, of course, because it's fun. You know, right now we've got the most cynical society I think we've ever had in our history. So everybody wants to say everything's BS.
Well, it's one thing to say,
some of it is.
Everything is BS, but it's about something true a lot of the time. So we have to find out what it was really about. You put a lot of money into it, but it makes me wonder, like, why did the Soviets? What do you think about the Soviet space program? Right? I mean, they didn't do it, or what? What's going on with the Soviets?
Well, here's the thing with the Soviets, and I worked against the Soviets for a while, so I had to be intimately familiar with how they work.
I read that Spy versus Spy in Mad Magazine. I saw you.
Yeah, there you go. See, that's it. That's how it works. Here's
one
the
thing
thing
you got to give the Soviets credit for is, man, they've got some good logos and poster art. Gotta admit, that is pretty cool.
They've got great monuments and poster and everything. But here's the thing about the Russians. Okay, the Soviets, because the Russia of today is not the Soviet Union.
Right,
that's
Ukraine,
a whole other peeve of mine.
Ukraine, Kazakhstan, yeah.
Yeah. So here's the thing about the Soviets. Had we been faking that, they would have known it, and they would not have been quiet about it.
Right.
No doubt.
They never came out and said America's faking it. I'm telling you, folks, we went to the moon. But
why did they fail? Or sorry,
we're not.
I agree completely. We certainly did.
We're not being told everything that was found. there is what I think the big secret was, and part of it
And
also
everything that was
technology.
used. Like,
Well,
My
now,
point with
here's the thing.
Capricorn 1.
Um,
Go, Walter. Sorry.
the Soviets might have had, they might not have been able to, it might have been the life support issue. Our life support systems, I think, were better than theirs. Remember, they used to just throw people up, and let them burn alive in the rocket. That's how we'll learn what we can learn. They would do stuff that, not that we didn't do heinous stuff, but as far as we know,
Joseph Farrell in your chat saying one reason they failed was because their big
Bingo.
lunar boosters were sabotaged.
that too. See,
Walter. No, I'm just kidding.
there was stuff going on, but that I mean, we wouldn't have been able to get to everything. If they could do it, I think they would have done it.
That's interesting about the medical. What did you say earlier? The program your father, the medical.
Well, he was under the command of what's in the Air Force Aerospace Medicine Division.
Aerospace medicine. So the fact that aerospace medicine might have been the problem, and you think maybe we got our aerospace medicine from somewhere else. I mean, that's kind of interesting. We had maybe.
No. When you say somewhere else, that makes it all mysterious.
Not necessarily aliens.
Yeah. We what we did was the combined effort, because ours were no slouches. Let's not assume that because of this Operation Paperclip stuff that our own scientists were a bunch of dummies. No, that's not the case. What it was the combined effort. What those German Luftwaffe guys knew, when you brought it over and combined with what our guys were doing, we ultimately made it work. And it just might be that between the sabotage that Joseph mentioned, which I agree with, and also, the distinct problems with life support. I think there's multiple technological reasons why the Soviets didn't make it. Because another thing is, if they had, they would have bragged about that.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
As anybody would and should, you do something like that.
Their
My point with Capricorn 1
almost more
day.
advanced right before they ended it all, and that it was actually they put their shuttle up around Earth before NASA's shuttle went up, I believe, and it was one drone flight. It was radio controlled flight that they did before, and then they never used them again.
But the fact the ISS, everything stands out. It's interesting to me that we get credit for the moon, they get credit for the space station.
Right before the Soviet Union failed,
okay,
though.
First of all, the shuttles, the Soviet shuttles, it must have been some other model of shuttle, because the Burion, I think it's called, that was a total ripoff of our design, and it was a hollow model essentially to say, hey, look, we're doing this, but nothing ever happened with it. So if they got some shuttle thing off the ground,
well, that's the one I was speaking of. The
Burion never flew.
No, they never went up. Okay, my mistake. I thought I had read that they sent it up once before, and it was unmanned. It was radio commanded.
No, that sounds like that's, from what I understand, that's an apocryphal
Internet
tale.
story could be.
Yeah.
It sounds like the Nazi missiles with TVs on them to be more or less the first type of drones, but unrelated to air and space. Space programs. But I was going to say, the reason I brought up Capricorn 1 was because it seemed, if you examine that movie and you kind of put yourself in the shoes of these guys who trained for years and years and got everything together, education, physically, whatever, to be an astronaut, and the day the mission is going to happen, they just walk them into a side room and they go, we know your daughter's on her way to school. We can take that car out, no problem. We know your wife and your son is on a helicopter. We can drop that helicopter right now. So you need to understand, as you're walking out there, you're saying you went to the Mars, and you hit the Mars. You're saying you went to Mars, etc. And I just use that example to be like, well, if I went through all that, I really had to lie about something so colossal after trying so hard personally, I would look exactly like the astronauts in that 33 days after, kind of weary of the hand that feeds me with NASA and the government now, and also just kind of scared for my life, or scared for what existence means now, or you can't really tell what's going on with their existential breakdowns. But I think that a lot of other note I wanted to add in Paperclip, when you guys were talking about it earlier, I think we always overlook a lot of stuff that we brought over that wasn't just because we needed rocket scientist von Braun. And I think the intelligence sector, and as far as us arming it and throwing it back into Germany to fight Russia and everything else, I think those were huge pools of stuff that could have gotten far into exotic weaponry, the crossover between exotic occult concepts
Yeah.
and stuff like that. I don't think we got like, the Vril team, or they disappeared on the Glock.
Well,
but,
there was no such thing as a Vril. The Vril and the Hanabu, that's all bullshit. We were saying that earlier. And the thing
wait,
that was
wait. The Vril.
whoa.
Even
The
Maria
Vril
West is
flying
real.
saucer
Victorian?
and
Yeah.
the Hanabu are all
That-
bullshit.
That's
I would
fine, Walter.
disagree.
I thought you were saying there's no Vril. That you're right on the saucer. Sorry.
The saucer stuff.
Sorry.
Well,
to
how are
interrupt
you? How are you defining Vril? Are you
as
defining it as?
it's like a Oregon
adjacent,
energy,
like-
energy that was
Okay,
used
well,
by
they're-
these super long-haired women who were not the Thule, they were not the Black Sun, they were not.
Wait a minute. You meaning that Marina Orsic stuff?
Well, her group of women
was
who
cute.
were working with scientists, she came up with 400 pages of how to design the supposed Hanabu, whatever, in High German and Latin.
And L. Frank Baum came up with hundreds of pages of The Wizard of Oz.
After
And-
Blavatsky, because he was a theosophist. We did that.
And I get your
recently.
point.
I mean,
I do get your
it's
point.
questionable. The whole Maria Orsic thing has been proven time and again to be very questionable.
Really?
But the thing with Operation Paperclip was what was driving it was not von Braun or even the atomic scientists. What was driving it were the aviation medicine scientists of the Luftwaffe and American aviation medicine scientists. It was putting man in space. And the reason von Braun, they wanted him twofold, was obviously for the weaponry they could use, but just as much because they thought, hey, he could build rockets that'll get us into space, which he ultimately did. But the real driving force was the goal to put man in space. That's what was really driving Operation Paperclip.
But I think there's a lot of mind control in there too. So like what we see.
Oh yeah, they got the MK Ultra guys. Yeah. I think they got
my
a
labs,
which was more important to them sometimes.
Sure.
my labs and the induction experiences, as well as aspects of the occult that may or may not be related to exotic
German
technologies
occultists.
or
Yeah,
whatever.
definitely would have been were among those scientists. Absolutely.
Right. What is the number, Walter? To me, it's 150 to 300,000 high-ranking SS brought here and made comfy, and so either in Huntsville or
I don't think there were not
more
SS. I don't think there were that many.
It's supposed to be like 30 to 50,000,
Yeah,
including families, and then there's 300,000 German soldiers' families who were brought from the Druganovich Trail to South America, but not necessarily.
I know about
Paperclip.
A lot of spreading around in South America.
Well, when I think Strughold, Hubertus Strughold, no, not Strughold, but another guy off the top of my head, I'm not remembering his name, but when it was discovered by journalists in the United States and Canada, how deeply involved this particular guy had been involved in the heinous experimentation in Nazi Germany before and during the war, before we got a hold of him, the U.S. Air Force was embarrassed publicly. So here's what's interesting. They didn't hand this guy over to the authorities back in Germany. They escorted him on a plane and sent him to South America, where he was received by Germans there. This was the U.S. Air Force did this. So I find that, and that's in the actual mainstream history of Operation Paperclip. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. It used to be, it was supposed to be that they would say, well, you're going back to Germany. We can't have you here. But they sent this guy to South America.
Colonia Dignidad.
Somewhere in Argentina, and then where he ended up after that, I don't know. So, what does that tell you? What arrangement did they have, or who did they know was down there that they handed this guy off to?
And
Walter, did you
Bariloche.
see?
The big, just to say really quickly, Hitler's supposed to have gone to Bariloche before going to San Bernardino, because Paraguay, it's easier because there's less socialist Italians than there are in Argentina. But when he got there to Argentina, he went to Bariloche. Today, Bariloche is where the Atomic Research Center is. So it's their own little mini linear accelerator in Argentina and connected to the hydroelectric power plant. So there's a lot of stuff around there. People have these stories in El Buzón of UFOs. That's the epicenter in Argentina for UFO stories.
Did anybody watch Hunting Hitler, a special forces operator, Green Beret guy? Can't think of his name.
I also swam that lake when I was in Bariloche to get to the island where his big concrete stone
Oh, really?
manor is supposed to be. But that's again
Yeah.
one of the reasons why I was convinced he went to Paraguay, because there's a
Yeah.
lot of evidence for getting him out into San Bernardino. When
And I
San
think
Bernardino today has
Mengele
got
and
the most poisoned lake in all of South America. Like nothing can
wow.
live in it. It's all
I think Mengele and a lot of people like that kind of came in and out of this arrangement. They could have had another safe place, or they could have met here, or whatever. But nope. I thought I had another point.
Well, you know, that's a good point you bring up. With, under Alan Dulles' CIA in particular, I could totally see Mengele possibly, you know, having come into the United States for
Oh, well, he was
whatever
MK
reason.
Ultra's Dr.
you know.
Green. You know, we had a few
So-
mysterious MK Ultra doctors, and when you look
Mhm.
at the actual interactions with patients or survivors or whatever, there's certain
Mhm.
doctors that never had normal names. And Dr. Green, seen by so many people around the world or whatever, is supposedly Mengele. Like I said, I think he had a comfy spot, and then he still went out and did his own adventures. But I think a lot of what turned into aspects of MK Ultra, even the abduction phenomenon, uses Nazi exotic technology and their knowledge of mind control mixed with Ultra or however they figured that out. Do you think that the Air Force, the 3705th bomber wing, or do you think anyone in the Air Force carries out my labs, Walter?
That's another thing I have.
Richard Doty directly said yes,
Oh,
but
for
I
fuck.
was like, "What?
Okay, let
this
me
is
tell
not
you.
a person I'm
Oh
taking."
When I-
boy.
When I was an OSI agent in my first year,
Yeah.
there was a special project that I was a counterintelligence guy, and I pitched what we call a development case, a development file, to my boss, and they said, "Yeah, you can do it and stuff." But I got a total cautionary tale briefing about Richard Doty, and you know, hey, we want to avoid. It's like, this is Richard Doty. Don't be Richard Doty. And this was
Right.
before he was, you know, I had ever heard of him before.
Yeah.
You know, he was public. This was in 1994. Okay.
Wow.
And I was told, you want to avoid being this guy, Richard Doty, because he embarrassed the hell out of the Air Force. He, you know, and that's what it was. He was used as a cautionary tale. I've only communicated personally with the guy once. It was a few years ago. It was over texting DMs, and it was a pleasant interaction. However, the problem I have is he and I used to do his specialty. While he was in, he had one particular specialty. That was my specialty when I was at Wright-Patterson. And that specialty involves, let's say, perception management and telling, you know, things that aren't necessarily true for a purpose, for an agenda. And here's the thing. I personally find Richard Doty to be a narrative opportunist. Whatever keeps him relevant to the community, whatever keeps him speaking at conferences, whatever keeps him being interviewed on radio shows and whatever, Richard Doty will tell. Okay. He'll say what they want to hear.
Right.
But so therefore, I personally, because of all that, I generally don't buy Richard Doty's claims.
Well,
You've seen the
forget
body
that.
language.
Where
You've
do
seen
my
the
labs
speech
come
patterns. You've seen all that same stuff that I was looking at too. Hey,
What?
and you can identify. You've seen the speech patterns, the body language. You've watched it closely and identified those same tells that I've watched when he's talked. Same thing with Corbell.
Yeah,
that guy.
Corbell to me is a carnival barker.
from? Most
No
annoying.
credibility whatsoever.
Well, we're also about like 10 minutes late or to the end. So I want to ask a
Okay.
couple
Sure,
questions.
go ahead.
One someone asked was about whether you believe, and we kind of talked a bit about the underground military bases and
Mhm.
breakaway civilization. Do you think that there is a breakaway civilization simultaneously existing somewhere isolated from us here?
Here's what I think about that, because I've changed. I used to use the phrase breakaway civilization, which it's an excellent concept. It's an excellent definition, and we owe, you know, Richard Dolan coming up with the definition, and that, you know, is a very good
Corey
definition.
Good tried to sue me for using.
Oh God, Corey
Oh,
Good.
Corey
I'm
Good.
sorry that you had to go through that circus. Here's the thing.
I'm sorry you
I
said
think
his name out here.
the
Sorry.
word civilization is too big. You know, it causes people to think
Factions.
of this breakaway. I say group. Faction would be another good word. And here's the thing: these breakaways, they coexist with us in this world. They just have access to, as as Dolan defined. They have access to resources, both material and financial or whatever, to do kind of their own thing and have access to technologies that we, the common masses, don't have, and the ability to develop these things. So what it is it amounts to their existence is, that much better than ours, and certain technologies they've developed may be asymmetric to the line we've followed.
So like Elysium.
Yeah, kind of, but on a much lesser scale. But
Right.
yeah, so I think these breakaways exist. Absolutely, I think, and I think there's probably more than one of them, but it's not as far developed or as wild as people's imaginations like to think.
TR3B real or part of that, or just a conspiracy?
The TR3B?
Yeah, like is
then you're getting into possible. I've got no problem with the like the Aurora, the TR3B, something being a nugget of truth about that, because I mean you learn pretty quickly when you look at that stuff, particularly if you work around that world like I did. Look, whatever. For example, this is one example. Ours is not the only one who does this, but the U.S. Air Force. If the U.S. Air Force tells you aircraft A is our most advanced aircraft we have, you can bet money that that's not the truth. We have something you don't know about that's probably, at least in a practical application, 20 to 30 years ahead of what we're being told aircraft A could do. And here's another thing. You're told aircraft A has this ceiling and that speed. I guarantee you the ceiling's higher and the speed is faster, the capabilities. That's just common military sense, good sense. But also you can bet that there's something in being used in practical application that's going to be, what you'd call 20 to 30 years advanced that they're not telling you about. And again, that's also just good military sense.
Right. Also, we've got this idea of, whether space is being faked and the moon's being faked, but also if it's coming back. Because if we're supposed to be able to have been there before, why are we not? When are we going back to space, in your opinion, if we're going at all, or whatever?
Or are we already there currently?
We're already there currently. I'm convinced of that.
I think that whole discussion's a moot issue, because who says we ever really stopped? I just think they've always been doing the secret missions to space, and we haven't really stopped our man presence in space. We claim that narrative to the public, but there's no legitimate reason to assume just because they told us that we haven't. My God, please, come on. Look what they told us about other things, that wasn't true. But yeah, I think we've been up there.
According to NASA, they lost all the technology, and it will be a, quote, very painful process to rebuild back up.
Yeah, right. Of course, that's NASA, right? Never a straight answer. But see, that's NASA doing a sleight of hand. Don't look behind the man behind the curtain. That's NASA telling you about them, allegedly them. NASA isn't speaking for whatever secret manned space program that the military has. And no, it's not like this advanced Starfleet crap that the jerk Corey Goode has claimed and lied about. It's something that is, for the most part,
really debunked in court. I have to.
Exactly. He debunked himself so he can go piss up a rope. But, a classified manned space program, I think, was mostly parallel to what we saw NASA doing in the early decades. But somewhere, my guess is somewhere around 1980, it really started pulling ahead and farther. But remember, it's not like we are using the shuttle, but there was really secretly a Starship Enterprise. That's ridiculous. It was just, if there's a classified program, which I think there has been, it's just a little bit more advanced than what we know about publicly.
Enough to the point where people with telescopes looking 24/7 across the globe distributed have not seen these things launching, showing up. So unless they develop poking technology before they develop advanced abilities, which I highly doubt,
you're wrong.
Making these things look similar to what we've already put up in space.
You're wrong. Here's the thing, okay? People would be seeing this all the time. Like when they've launched stuff from Vandenberg for years. Tell me, has anyone in this room ever been privy to what's inside the classified payloads that get loaded on those rockets before they're launched? No.
Well, Well, I'll sign up for the first to be privy to it if you want to disclose, but no, unfortunately, I don't think any of us have.
I don't think Walter's
That's
got it.
right. Now, I'll tell you, I've been the closest because one of my bosses who I referred to, she was the OSI agent who was briefed in and assigned to be the OSI agent when these payload pods were escorted from their point of origin to Vandenberg or back. So here's the thing, who are we to say that that the payload couldn't have had a live crew aboard? And people say, oh, but the telemetry signal, it would have revealed it. Oh, come on. If you don't think they found a way to shroud all that, come on, you're being naive. I'm not saying you, Exotic. I'm speaking the rhetorical you, us.
No, relevant though, relevant.
But here's the thing: we could have been putting people in space right under the noses of the public,
disguising it for years,
classified, disguised, and I always get the guy that says, "Well, my Uncle Steve was a security troop at Vandenberg." Well, I'm sorry, but Tech Sergeant Uncle Steve was not briefed in on what was on board that rocket. Sorry, So it's from my perspective, with my experience around that world. That's the possibility that I suggest it be considered. So it would have been a lot easier. It's a lot easier to have put people up in space secretly than people think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's just take a look at some of the rockets that have these arrow spikes on the front, right? They have these towers.
I can only hear one at a time.
Right.
For the love of God. All right. Not Data and Star Trek.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, like Diego Garcia as a location or Antarctica as launch locations as well for secret space. It's the perfect spots that.
There you go.
A lot easier to hide.
There you go. I mean,
Antarctica's got a lot to hide.
No one's gonna see it.
Yeah.
So
East LA's got a lot to hide. Downtown, I bet you that there's some space programs.
Hey, what about what about? And we don't know the imagine there could be some technology that some type of launch vehicle could be launched from a nuclear submarine that surfaces out in the middle of the Pacific.
That's what I tend to imagine. Yeah.
And you
the ICBMs that they're already
things.
launching out of those things are pretty much go into space as it is. So
yeah, so it's these kinds of things are possible, and I find them potentially just as fascinating, as some of the wild stuff that's not likely true that people come up with, but it's not as fun, as the wild stuff. So
we understand
the possibility that very advanced forms of technology, those of electrodynamics and space-time modification and refractive index control were actually discovered quite a while ago. Then we automatically have to accept the idea that these craft wouldn't be easily visible from certain angles and that they could basically be self-cloaked by very mechanism of their operation and their flight.
Yeah.
And so that stuff is entirely possible. I mean, going back, to the 1800s, some of these strange events have been observed and reported.
Yeah, exactly.
And so do we really think that it was just dropped, forgotten about completely? I mean, why did this stuff pop up and then completely disappear? Even archive.org has been forced to delete or completely remove any traceability of certain things that they had posted. They should have never been online, apparently.
Well, two things real quick. Number one, in defense of Frank bringing up the Vril stuff, I mean, it could simply be that the people talking about the Vril energy, it was actually something very real that they were just calling it something else. They were on to something that was real, but they just, didn't know how to describe it in terms we would today scientifically. The other thing is, remember, anti-gravity research was something that was open source. It was in popular in science and stuff like that. But somewhere around 1958, many people think there was a breakthrough because suddenly that stuff disappeared from open sources.
Right, exactly. I want to point this out, too, since we're just, crossing over the 2-hour mark. The idea, the whole Vril thing might just be a conspiracy. You could say it's misdirection, but here's what I've found. Yeah. As an experimenter, engineer, and researcher, what I found is that research into the Vril has brought me through searches to viable, testable technology that I can replicate here in the lab. So whether or not the entire story as it's portrayed is there historically accurate, even if it's completely false, not the kind of thing you tell your friends. But if you want to take it to the lab and test it, electrodynamics is a highly viable technology that has been entirely under-investigated, and it operates by a mechanism not recognized in today's physics, even in quantum electrodynamics. we have a serious problem where all of the variables that would generally go to infinities in their system or in their calculations have been gauged out. And so with this gauge factor, we remove the ability for electromagnetic systems that synthesize magnetic or electric fields to produce a change in the refractive index. If we accept that every single magnet or every single transmitter, every electric or magnetic field produces a fundamental change in the permittivity and permeability of that space-time, now we have a mechanism to modify that very fabric of space, which we all exist in. And we have a propulsion technology which could have easily been investigated, what I verified personally in my lab and I'm continuing to develop and investigate, that, of course, many before have discovered for a very long time. And it's been known since Maxwell. Even Maxwell had the system of quaternions to consider the variable refractive index. Heaviside and Gibbs recalculated it to remove those variables because they were too complicated for the mathematicians of the time to implement the power grid for the United States, which is why we lost.
Well, remember the sleight of hand they did with physics. We were forced onto the Einstein track, and everything has to follow Einstein. My friend Dr. Joseph Farrell points this out all the time. The other very viable, in some opinions, more likely truths of physics were just publicly, nope, that can't be because Einstein was used, to divert our attention off of what some people were really doing. And I applaud what you're saying. You're right. Take it to the lab. It doesn't matter what the crazy story about the naked ladies in the circle with the long blonde hair. If the nugget of truth of this real thing that we're talking about is something that is real, then that's what counts. Right.
Yep, we don't care about the story. I'm fully willing to dump all that stuff.
Yeah, right.
Grinder, as long as it equals a testable technology that we can do something with. That's
I'm glad Exotic said all that.
Literally any story, no matter how extreme, no matter how crazy, from anybody at all, regardless of their evidence, regardless of their history, just to get that little tidbit, that morsel of technology that I can stick on my lab bench.
Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's what I say about all the kind of
truth
stuff we do. Yeah, where we're looking into this weird stuff. So,
guys, make sure you also go to. I was going to say, make sure you go to Walter Bosley's YouTube channel and subscribe because he has some underviewed videos that you definitely need to see. I mean, these are incredible. And
let's have another link for that. I am going to subscribe.
I will do that too. But guess what? If you haven't figured it out, you can go to also Walter Bosley.
Everybody.
Let me just say also you can go to walterbosley.com because that's the best way to get his books. I mean, you can find one on Amazon, but
and also lostcontentlibrary.com. That's that and walterbosley.com definitely.
Sweet.
Right. And so you can Lost. I spelled it wrong. What did I do here?
One super chat before it all starts. What does Walter think of Giant of Kandahar story?
I personally, I would love for that to be true. I lean towards it's not, but I'm always open to hearing because I still have a lot of fun with this stuff. I mean, come on, it's fun. And you just heard me say, don't throw babies out with the bathwater. I always ask myself, what's the nugget of truth to this story about the Giant of Kandahar? I don't just dismiss everything. And that one is intriguing. That's a lot of fun.
And it's been changing on the internet.
Red one or something, and that could be the truth. And sorry, I just wanted to point out one quick thing. The Buran did complete one uncrewed space flight in 19.
Oh, it did?
In 19.
Oh, wow, okay.
Uncrewed space flight that it completed safely. So it would have been drone remote controlled in 88, and then
so half of my understanding was true. It was definitely a design ripoff of ours, but the fact is they did put it up there in space.
All I was going to say real quick was I was glad Exotic said all that and even said take it to the lab and the bench and test it out for that.
That's
truth.
right. That's
on
right.
my
Absolutely.
side, intellectually, just reading everything, I came to the conclusion that that's where that would definitely be the outer world. The inner world, if we're just to understand concepts, is it somewhere between Orgon and Chi? Like it's invocable and buildable in the body in some way that would work the way that those martial arts that are dependent on Chi and not just using it as part of the striking process or whatever works. But then I saw so many psychosexual, psychedelic kind of crossovers in the explanation. It also seemed to be like Orgon. because it is testable in the lab. It is a science thing. I think that yes, sir.
I was just going to say on that issue, that reminds me of check out Joseph Farrell's work on the atomic bomb explosions and at Trinity site, the tests where there seemed to be an extra burst of energy that was more than the sum of its parts. In other words, the atomic explosion seemed to trigger an effect that triggered an extra energy or power. Joseph can describe it better than I am, but it could be that when you're talking about the chi and the orgone and then the vril, it could be kind of in that vein of there's something out there that's more than just the sum of the parts.
Right.
Yeah, the one warning, the piece of advice I would give to listening to wild stories is anybody who has advice or information to offer you, regardless of whether or not it seems believable, listen to it and consider it. If you can model things in your own mind, which I should say is a requirement for any investigator, model their story in your own mind as if it was completely true. Consider that they might not be remembering it correctly. Maybe they're not even deceiving you. Maybe they are. But look for those tidbits of consistent information which align with things that you previously learned and seem to form a bigger picture. If you can pull those pieces out, take all of what you can, because even people who are sent to mess you up, throw you off your course, have generally information which they'll accidentally speak about to give you enough so that it's a partial truth. And if you've got the discernment, consider it as possible in your mind for that moment, but don't let it affect your perception of reality after you leave that conversation. And that's my warning. Do not adopt that into your total perception of the world until you actually test it or have some proof. But consider it possible in the moment where you have access to that information or while you're being told that story. It's the only way you're going to get any kind of viable information out of these extreme sources. And we've got to be really, really stringent with our investigation. Not overly skeptical. Doesn't matter how you perceive outside in that moment, but you've got to remember that there is a consistent reality which aligns with many other experiments, many other perceptions that you'll have by that point. And if you can link it in and it all makes sense consistently, you've got a picture that you can do something with.
Yeah. All right, we got one last question here. Bosley, any thoughts on Burkhardt-Heim's theory?
I'm not familiar with it.
Neither am I. Sorry, I'm sorry. Compliziert. Oh God, I butchered that. But
Compliziert.
I was messaging with Joseph Giza Death Star community in your live chat there, and he's down for coming on to another one of these with us. We'll aim for 2 weeks' time, so I'll be in contact with you, Walter, and if you can email Joseph, and I'd love to really get into his alchemy of free energy and so many more of the over unity physics and amazing research that both Joseph and you have gone into over the years.
Yeah, and everybody check out Walter's books, but don't fail to check out Joseph Farrell's, all of his books, and then Peter Levenda. And even Jim Mars is part of this triad that I thought were the most important people last couple of decades, really getting the kernels of truth, the most genuinely out or collected in one book than I've seen. I would have to read 11 other authors to get the wrong idea about Nazis in Antarctica. And then I look into their stuff, and it's Walter Bosley and Peter Levenda will have you reconceiving the way you look at the world and the way you understand systems and organizations and stuff like that. Joseph Farrell has so much. It seems like he has 9 lives. There's so much technical information in there, and then he'll completely switch topics, and then he'll go back. Actually, let me do a 7th book on paperclip and mind control, or just whatever. He's like the legitimate. I don't want to compare him to David Childress, but because that's more anthropology and archaeology. But he's like a hyper legitimate.
But I know he's watching. But I'm gonna give you a little tidbit that you can just put in your back pocket. As diverse as you see Joseph Farrell's works, he does have. It's coming from an overarching hypothesis.
Oh, I can tell. Yeah, especially the way he references his other stuff.
Yeah,
as you get further into it,
Yeah, and which even cool. I am anxious to for him to finally get to. And, you know, because as long as I've
Yeah.
known him and we've had private talks and stuff, and I get a little bit of insight, you know, it took me, I think, like 4 years to understand what he calls the metaphor. He's probably laughing right now. And I
Right.
still am not a master of it. It took me 4 years just to grasp, you know,
Right.
the basic concept. So, yeah.
And Peter
so,
Levenda is really great. I had the most polite falling out with him with his decision to go forward with the TTSA. There's actually an
yeah.
interview where for an hour and a half I'm just stoning him with like, so why you?
Why,
You know?
Peter?
And then I'd re-explain to him how significant he was already, and then why teaming up with Blink 182 would solve anything. But and that still looks like an embarrassment to me. But he's one of my favorite authors for the past decades, outside of comic books. And I don't know, I highly recommend Levenda's stuff. Maybe not
Yes,
post
I agree.
TTSA, because even the books that he wrote with TTSA, I did not find moving beyond a like Ancient Aliens episode.
I think that was a
But,
gig for him.
Yeah, sure,
A
sure.
well enough paying gig, and he had to stick within their narrative.
Right.
You know, in his defense, I also think Tom DeLonge was used, you know, by
Oh
the
yeah.
perception management operations guys. But that's
But they
another
were asking
discussion.
for thousands and thousands of dollars to build a spaceship, and they were releasing children's books and all sorts of things, like, you know, pencils and
Anything
backpacks
cultish
before they
releasing
did anything
children's
legitimate.
books in
I'm
general.
sorry, man. What's that?
Anything like cultish and releasing children's books, not a good combo in general, usually, right?
Well, especially if you're saying you're going to bring out the big truth we've all been waiting for, but you're going, wait, first,
Yeah.
help us crowdfund a spaceship. We need to just
Yeah,
build one.
exactly.
That's the first goal of you learning what you've seeked all these years in the answers and esotericism and ufology and etc. And,
Yep.
and Peter Levenda covers a lot of esotericism and well.
Yes, he does indeed. So, well, thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me on in
Thank
this
you
discussion.
so much, Walter. It was amazing, and yeah, I'll be in touch, and we'll make sure to do this again in 2 weeks' time, and include the amazing Joseph P. Farrell, and just
That'd be awesome.
bringing these minds together. It's been an honor. It's awesome, and thank you for all you've done, good sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Walter.
I look forward to
I forgot to bring up the hitchhiker effect, but we'll do that one on the next one.
We'll do that next one. Yeah.
That's a whole other hour. So
Okay, cool.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Much
All right.
Peace, everybody.